This lecture is about how to mine text data with social network as context. In this lecture, we're going to continue discussing contextual text mining. In particular, we're going to look at the social network of authors of text as context. So first, some motivation for using network context for analysis of text. The context of a text article can form a network. For example, the authors of research articles might form a collaboration network. Or authors of social media content might also form social networks. For example, in Twitter, people might follow each other. Or in Facebook, some people might claim as friends of others, etc. So such context connects the content of the authors. Similarly, locations associated with text can also be connected to form geographic network. But in general, you can imagine the metadata of the text data can form some kind of network if they have some relations. Now, there is some benefit in jointly analyzing text and its social network context or network context in general. And that's because we can use network to impose some constraints on topics in text. So for example, it's reasonable to assume that authors connected in a collaboration network tend to write about similar topics. So such heuristic can be used to guide us in analyzing topics. Text also can help characterize the content associated with each subnetwork. And this is to say that both kinds of data, the network and text, can help each other. So for example, the difference in opinions expressed in two subnetworks, let's say two social networks, can be revealed by doing this kind of joint analysis. So here we're going to briefly introduce a model called a network supervised topic model. And in this slide, we're going to give some general ideas, and then in the next slide, we're going to give some more details. But in general, in this part of the course, we don't have enough time to cover these frontier topics in detail, but we provide references that would allow you to read more about the topic, to know the details. But it should still be useful to know the general ideas and to know what they can do, to know when you might be able to use them. So the general idea of network supervised topic modeling is the following. Let's start with viewing the regular topic models like PLSA or LDA as solving an optimization problem. Of course, in this case, the optimization objective function is the likelihood function. So we often use maximum likelihood estimator to obtain the parameters. And these parameters would give us useful information that we want to obtain from text data. For example, topics. So we want to maximize the probability of text data given the parameters generally denoted by lambda here. Now, the main idea of incorporating network is to say that to think about the constraints that can be imposed based on the network. In general, the idea is to use the network to impose some constraints on the model parameters, lambda here. For example, the text at adjacent nodes of the network can be assumed to cover similar topics. Indeed, in many cases, they tend to cover similar topics. So we may be able to smooth the topic distributions on the graph, on the network, so that the adjacent nodes will have very similar topic distributions. So they will share a common distribution over topics or have just slight variations of the topic distributions or topic coverage. So technically, what we can do is simply to add network-induced regularizers to the likelihood objective function, as shown here. So instead of just optimizing the probability of text data given parameters lambda, we're going to optimize another function, f. This function combines the likelihood with a regularizer function called r here. And the regularizer is defined on the parameters lambda and the network. It tells us basically what kind of parameters are preferred from network constraint perspective. So you can easily see this is in effect implement the idea of imposing some prior on the model parameters. Only that we're not necessarily having a probabilistic model, but the idea is the same. We're going to combine the two in one single objective function. So the advantage of this idea is that it's quite general. Here, the topic model can be any generative model for text. Right? It doesn't have to be PLSA or LDA or the current topic models. And similarly, the network can be also any network, any graph that connects these text objects. This regularizer can also be any regularizer. We can be flexible in capturing different heuristics that we want to capture. And finally, the function f can also vary. So there can be many different ways to combine them. So this general idea is actually quite powerful. It offers a general approach to combining these different types of data in a single optimization framework. And this general idea clearly can be applied to many problems. But here in this paper referenced here, a particular instantiation called net PLSA was studied. In this case, it's just an extension of PLSA to incorporate some simple constraint imposed by a network. And the prior here is the neighbors on the network must have similar topic distribution. They must cover similar topics in similar ways, and that's basically what it says in English. So technically, we just have a modified objective function here that's defined on both the text collection C and the network graph G here. And if you look at this formula, and you can actually recognize some part fairly familiarly, because they should be fairly familiar to you by now. Right? So can you recognize which part is the likelihood for the text data given by a topic model? Well, if you look at it, you will see this part is precisely the PLSA log likelihood that we want to maximize when we estimate the parameters for PLSA alone. But the second equation shows some additional constraints on the parameters. And in particular, we see here it's to measure the difference between the topic coverage at node U and node V, the two adjacent nodes on the network. We want their distributions to be similar. So here we are computing the square of their differences. And we want to minimize this difference. And note that there's a negative sign in front of this sum, this whole sum here. So this makes it possible to find the parameters that are both to maximize the PLSA log likelihood. That means the parameters will fit the data well, and also to respect this constraint from the network. And this is a negative sign that I just mentioned. Right? Because there's a negative sign, when we maximize this objective function, we are actually minimize this second term here. So if we look further in this picture, we'll see there is also a weight of age between U and V here. And that's based on our network. If we have a weight that says, well, these two nodes are strong collaborators of researchers, or these two are strong connections between two people in a social network, and then they will have a high weight, then that means it will be more important to make sure that their topic coverages are similar. And that's basically what it says here. And then finally, you see a parameter lambda here. This is a new parameter to control the inference of network constraint we can see easily if lambda is set to 0, we just go back to the standard PLSA. But when lambda is set to a larger value, then we will let the network influence the estimated models more. So as you can see, the effect here is that we're going to do basically the PLSA, but we're going to also try to make the topic coverages on the two nodes that are strongly connected to be similar. And we ensure their coverages are more similar. So here are some sample results from that paper. And this slide shows the regular results of using PLSA. And the data here is DBLP data, bibliographic data about the research articles. And the experiments have to do with using 4 communities of publications. IR, information retrieval, that means DM stands for data mining, ML for machine learning, and web. There are 4 communities of articles. And we was hoping to see that the topic mining can help us uncover these 4 communities. But from these sample topics that you are seeing here that are generated by PLSA, PLSA is unable to generate 4 communities that correspond to our intuition. And the reason was because they are all mixed together and there are many words that are shared by these communities. So it's not that easy to use 4 topics to separate them. If we use more topics, perhaps we'll have more coherent topics. But what's interesting is that if we use the net PLSA, where the network, the collaboration network in this case of authors, is used to impose constraints. And in this case, we also use 4 topics, but net PLSA would give much more meaningful topics. So here we see that these topics correspond well to the 4 communities. The first is information retrieval, the second is data mining, third is machine learning, and the fourth is web. So that separation was mostly because of the influence of network, where we leverage the collaboration network information. Essentially, the people that form a collaboration network would then be kind of assumed to write about similar topics, and that's why we can have more coherent topics. And if you just listen to text data alone based on the co-occurrences, you won't get such coherent topics, even though a topic model like a PLSA or LDA also should be able to pick up co-occurring words. So in general, the topics that they generate represent words that co-occur with each other. But still, they cannot generate such coherent results as net PLSA, showing that the network context is very useful here. Now, a similar model could have been also used to characterize the content associated with each subnetwork of collaborations. So a more general view of text mining in the context of network is to treat text as living in a rich information network environment. That means we can connect all the related data together as a big network. And text data can be associated with a lot of structures in the network. For example, text data can be associated with the nodes of the network, and that's basically what we just discussed in the net PLSA work. But text data can be associated with edges as well, or paths, or even subnetworks. And such way to represent text data in the big environment of all the context information is very powerful, because it allows us to analyze all the data, all the information together. And so in general, analysis of text should be using the entire network of information that's related to the text data. So here's one suggested reading, and this is the paper about the net PLSA, where you can find more details about the model and how to estimate such a model.